Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. It's Monday morning to another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. Very happy to be joined, and welcome to the event space, Mr. Jonathan Jasberg. Jonathan, how you doing today?
Doing great. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing wonderful. I have to apologize because it's Monday for us, but it's probably already Tuesday for you.
So, just turned Tuesday.
Just turned Tuesday. All right. So happy Monday and happy to Tuesday to you. Today, we're talking to Jonathan about creating complex candid images related to lessons from Cairo and beyond in color, which I'm psyched to talk about. So just a reminder to everybody who's joining us here, if this is your first or millionth time joining us, welcome back. We appreciate you being here. If you do have any questions that you want to get over to Jonathan, feel free to get them in. We'll take those at the end and we'll answer them at the end, but feel free during the presentation, if something comes to mind, get them in and we'll make sure to hold them and get them addressed. But if you're joining us here on Zoom, you can use the Q&A tab. If you're joining us on Vimeo or Facebook, you can use the comment section. With that, I will turn over the floor to Jonathan, who has a wonderful presentation queued up for us, and just say thanks again for being here.
Cool. Well, thanks, Scott, and thanks to B&H, and most of all, thanks everybody for tuning in. Just want to start with a little bit of background about myself. I've been doing photography for about 20 years in one form or another. And prior to getting into photography, I actually studied filmmaking for a few years. And so because of that influence, I tend to think in terms of scenes, and a lot of storytelling and character development is very important to me. Some people already asked if I could share my general camera setup and settings. So I'll do that. Basically, I shoot very slowly or rather slowly and deliberately. So a little bit different than your typical street photographer that you see on YouTube. I shoot with my camera to my eye. I shoot with the LCD off for minimal distractions or no distractions. And I primarily have manual settings and just adjust things. So the Q2 that I use here is a 28mm lens, and it's a full frame camera. So it's a wide angle shot. But, and the other important thing is I use manual focus. I use zone focusing, which basically gets a lot of stuff in focus. And I do use other types of focusing if the shot calls for it. Anyway, let me go ahead and share my screen here and we'll get into this. Let's see. I think that's good. All right. So the most common question I get about photos like this and layered photos like this one, photos with a lot of dynamic action, a lot of moving parts like this one, and photos like this, which have a lot of different visual elements in them, is how did I see all of that? Was I just walking by and saw it and took the shot? And there's a lot of misconception. The reality is I don't see all of this. I wish I could, but I don't. So all these photos started off by me just noticing one small thing usually and being curious about it. And a lot of times that photo doesn't, or that small thing that I noticed doesn't even actually make it into the final photo. So a photo like this will oftentimes start off with a scene like this, where here I've noticed this guy with the white stripes on his arm, and I've just walked down to kind of investigate it with my camera. And I'm not really even worried about trying to be invisible. I just try to end up being sort of ignorable by injecting myself into the scene and just observing. And as you can see here in this photo, this kid is very smiley and happy that I'm taking the photo. But in the final photo here, it's the same kid in the black shirt, and he's completely oblivious. So a lot of things have happened between the first photo and this photo. I've noticed a lot. I've completely changed my angle, the way I'm shooting, and nothing from the first photo other than the smiley kid who's now ignoring me made it into this photo. So I'm going to talk about how I recognize and identify the elements in this photo and how I compose them in final compositions that don't look anything like the initial idea. I'm going to talk about the 7 elements that I look for in a lot of my photos. And after that, after introducing the elements, I'll go ahead and walk through a few shots from the very start to the end so you can get an idea of the process of making the whole photo. But before I get into that, I just want to introduce the probably the most important lesson in photography that I've received in my 20 years of taking photos. And that happened in the early 2000s when I was reading this magazine article about an award-winning sports photographer's award-winning shot. And the article, he was talking all about not being afraid to miss a good photo for the chance of a great photo. So this photo that he took, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was at the end of a car race. And it was, I think, some historic racer's last race, and it was a drama-filled race. And he ended up pulling off the victory. And all the sports photographers, they're like in this like designated area. And as this driver is getting out and being greeted by his crew and being presented with the trophy, the sports photographer is scanning the scene, and he notices like a unique opportunity, a moment that he can like go and get a totally different shot. And he does, and he gets this amazing shot, and it wins all sorts of awards. And he was just talking about how he's not afraid to take chances like that. Easier said than done, especially if you're out there getting paid for a job. If you don't come home with the photo, you're probably gonna get fired. But the main takeaway for me, and what he had talked about, was being in the moment and not being hypnotized by the moment. And this is easy to say, but very difficult to do, especially when moments get bigger and more rare, or more like catch you off guard. And it took me quite a while to figure out what this meant for me in my street photography. And I was reviewing shots for years and just noticing missed opportunities and mishandled moments. And I realized that a lot of times what happened would be I would notice a shot or notice something cool, and maybe notice a shadow or a reflection. And everything I noticed prior to like working the scene was all I would have while I was working the scene. I would have sort of tunnel vision. And it took years of practice just to like correct this and to be able to shoot a scene while at the same time trying to incorporate new things into the scene. So first I'll introduce the 7 elements that I scan for and try to work into the composition if I find any of them present. A lot of times I don't find any, but so these are in order of most common to least common, and sort of easiest to deal with and most difficult to deal with. So the first is supporting characters, and then frames, colors, reflections, symbols, echo, and shadows. And my basic thought process when I'm in a shot like the shots I was showing you before is I look to inject myself into the scene. I want to become ignorable and not worry about being invisible. And then I want to scan the scene for interesting elements to add. And also, very importantly, I want to scan for elements that are detracting from the scene and get rid of those. And if I find one, great. I'll sort of roughly kind of juggle it into the composition and keep the overall composition like in my peripheral while I'm scanning. And you can kind of get a sense for the scene and for the action, depending on how dynamic it is. And when you feel that it's peaking and possibly getting to the decisive moment times, that's when it's time to really dial it in and fix, the composition so it's at its best. So the first element that I'll talk about is supporting characters, something I think a lot about with like a filmmaking background. For the last, I guess since 2010, I've spent quite a bit of time in Japan, and for the last 5 or 6 years, I've spent spring and fall in Kyoto, Japan. And I do some photography walks there, and photographers from both overseas and from other cities in Japan come. And since I'm living in Kyoto, whether or not they're street photographers or travel photographers. One thing a lot of people have an interest in seeing is a geisha. This is an apprentice geisha in this shot. And just to give you a little bit of background, there were, after the end of World War II, there were about 80,000 geisha and apprentice geisha in Japan. Now there's fewer than 300. So seeing one often catches photographers off guard, and they take very straightforward, obvious shots like this that don't really tell a story. So one night in Japan, or in Kyoto, I'm in Gion, and I've been doing a project in Gion for quite a few years. And on this night, a geisha, which is very rare, appears out from a tea house to the right hand side of this scene. And I look, and there's nothing interesting. And so I turn, and I do this for a couple of reasons, but one is I don't want to see her, or I don't want her to see a cameraman. And she's walking toward me, and I know she's walking toward me, and I know I only have 20 or 30 seconds to figure something out. And I see it. I see my perfect supporting characters, and they haven't noticed. I make a quick adjustment, a very critical adjustment to my camera, and I focus on the supporting characters, and I drop my aperture to 1.7, or I open it all the way up, basically. And I don't even know if if the geisha is gonna walk by, and I don't know if my supporting characters are even gonna notice, but they do. And it's because I've focused on them, and the focus is not on the geisha at all. She's blurry, she's going by like a ghost in the night, and you only see her profile here. It's because of that you're getting the sense of the geisha and like the elegance and the rarity of the geisha just out of the reflection, or the reactions of these supporting characters here. And when I look to use supporting characters like this, to me, it's kind of like in screenwriting, how you write in a false protagonist or an accidental protagonist. It's kind of, you're using, just with the photo, you're using characters that wouldn't necessarily normally be the star, and you're making him the star. So that's one way to use supporting characters. Here's another example of where a supporting character was crucial. I was in Cairo, and this is a very odd scene. So all of a sudden, this little skirmish breaks out between these two ladies. It's kind of hard to notice, but this lady has her hijab flipped over her face. Very odd scene. I turn around. I know this is only going to last maximum of 20, 30 seconds. You know, fights never last long, right? And as soon as I take this photo, I think this is great. This is a nice memory, but it's way too straightforward. And so I scan, I'm scanning madly, and it happens. My supporting character comes out, and with an almost indifference and just this calm and relaxed gaze, like she almost can't be bothered to see what's going on. And as far as I'm concerned, like this here was the decisive moment. This is what makes the shot for me. And it completely contrasts just perfectly the intensity of her drawing back and still having her hijab over her face, and just the oddity of this scene on the right. Here's a shot in Istanbul. This was after a record-setting day of snow. And this is a neighborhood that's normally pretty quiet. And as I'm scrambling up this hill, because I see what's happening, to the left is a group of ladies who's made a makeshift sled, and it's made out of like a little rug and maybe a bag. And they're coming down the hill. And so I'm slipping and sliding all up the hill, trying to get up here. And I've got two choices. I can turn to the left and get their faces coming straight on at me. And that would be a very similar photo to what this man here is taking with his phone. But I scan the scene, I'm looking for something, and I find my supporting character. And not only do I find my perfect supporting character, I do something very important, which is I eliminate characters. So I don't like this man for a couple of reasons. One is I don't like the way he's dressed. I don't like that he's got his phone out. And my supporting character is who I want to tell the story. So I turn and I get it as they're coming down. I don't even know if they're going to make it down this far, but I'm willing to sacrifice the shot because of this supporting character. She's standing there just perfectly framed between the two cars. And she's got her beautiful red gloves and her coat. And it's her coat that tells the story of the snowball fight that was happening just prior to this. And more importantly, the removal of the man tells the story that I wanted to tell, the story that I was so attracted to when I saw what was going on. And that was the moment of these women and the moment that they're having with their daughters. And by having this man in the scene, it just doesn't tell that story. So that's the way I wanted to frame it. And that's why I used this character and cut out the others. The second element I use, I try to use all the time, especially with shooting 28mm, really helps, is frames. So here's an intersection in Sri Lanka. And this intersection was one of the only intersections in this small town that's showing any sort of life. But there's a big difference between this intersection and the intersection, let me see, I'll show you, then this intersection where I pulled off this shot in Cairo. This intersection is, while this is a very difficult shot to pull off, this intersection is a lot easier to work with and to pull off a shot because I've got this nice anchor here to build off of, and the background is nice and clean. So here, I'm initially very attracted to this, I don't know, this is some sort of monument or something. It looks like a Catholic thing, or a Christian thing. And I'm attracted to that for the symbolism. But this intersection is just too loose. It's too hard to, it's so messy in the background and there's nothing to work on. So I scan the scene and I find a nice framing glass and I step behind it. And now I've got a couple of things I need to solve. So basically for a shot like this to not appear lazy, I need to properly use all the frames that I've given myself. And I also need to clean this up. So there's this black bag here. And while I'm, waiting and working on that, this boy walks by who is tired because of the heat of the sun. And this is the unexpected moment here. And the important thing is that I don't lose my sense of thought or my train of thought and point my camera at him and, get him in the center of the composition. Because he's great right here as a foreground element. And I know he's only going to be resting there for probably 10 or 20 seconds, maybe. And so the important thing was just to really focus and make sure that I'm using all my frames. So I'm getting a guy in this frame and guys in these frames here. Here's another example of frames. So the last example of frames was using foreground frames. Here, we'll talk about using frames in the background, which are great for defining the characters that you pick out. Here, I'm in a bar in Cairo, and this is a very historic bar, and it's a bar I've been to quite a few times prior to this. Every time I come to this bar, I try to pick out a seat where if there is going to be a good shot that develops, I'll have a good seat to take it. But this is the type of bar where you don't really want to have your camera out and taking photos because it could get you into trouble. But the perfect opportunity comes when this cat sits down and has this nice moment with these two guys here. So while I notice this, I take this photo, and like maybe 10 years ago, I would have been happy with this photo, but there's a lot of problems with this photo. And the first problem, beyond it just being lazy composition, the first problem is context of the scene. I'm in a bar drinking beer, and it's smoky and it's loud. All that context is not coming through on this photo. That I can feel it, I can sense it, but it's easy. So it's easy to forget things like that when you're in these situations that perhaps it might not come through on the photo. And I knew that, and I knew what I had to do to fix it. I knew there was an opportunity. So I wait and I readjust. And here what I'm doing is just readjusting to get him in this frame here. There's this nice white board that I see. And so I've kind of adjusted my seat so I can get this shot. And now I've got a couple of problems. He's got this guy growing out of his back here, which is a problem. He's also on his phone. And the cat is now looking at me, probably telling me not to take his picture. And the main problem is the context is still not defined, but I know what's going to happen and I'm waiting for it. And when it does, I practically fall out of my seat, like holding up my camera, trying to lock it in perfectly. And I get him framed in this white box. And this is, him taking the big drink off the beer is what's finally giving me the best context that I can, that this is a place in Cairo where beers are being drunk and there's interesting things going on. And lucky for me, the cat loses interest in me. I become ignorable by this point, I guess. And the cat's back to having his moment. And it's just sticking with the photo for those extra 5 minutes or so that makes a photo go from being something that won't go anywhere to having a photo like this be one of the photos that a lot of editors and other like high profile photographers have specifically contacted me about, just taking those extra steps. The next element that I'll talk about is colors. I'm very visual and like I feel colors when I look at them. So there's colors that really attract me and there's colors that repulse me. I really like simple color palettes like this. And when I find color palettes like this, I'll just mark them, whether if they're in a neighborhood or here's at a camel market in Cairo. I'd been to this one probably 3 times at this point, maybe 4. And every time I go, I would walk by specifically this booth to see if there was any action going on. A lot of times there's either no action or too much action. But at this moment, there's seemingly just the right amount of action. But as you can see, since I just walked up, he's noticing me, he's looking at me. I'm standing very close to him. This guy, I kind of like this guy, but the big problems are that his head is in this pillar, so there's no clear definition there. And then the camel is also kind of kissing the pillar, which is an issue. But I kind of focus my attention over here, and eventually that works. He gets lost in a daydream. I lose the guy in the middle who wasn't really serving the picture, and the camel loses its head. So here's a shot in Nepal that I took just a few months ago, I think. And again, this is a shot where it's purely driven by the color palette. That's what's bringing me in. I like this shot. It's nice and dynamic. The person that I'm most interested in this shot is this girl here. She's got amazing stage presence and just something about her. And beyond that, her red pants and the boys' red shirts. The colors that I'm after are the red and the green, which are primary colors. Here, while I like the photo, I'm not really doing the scene justice. I'm not telling the story of what's happening. And I'm not clearly punctuating the fact that the color palette is what I'm noticing. It's pretty loose. So what's actually happening is this boy is bringing back this dog that had gotten lost, had kind of run off. And so the dog was lost for maybe, 20 minutes or something, and it's being returned to its owner. The owner is walking in from the right, and she is wearing the perfect color. So when she gets the dog passed to her, I step in, and similar to the photo in Istanbul, it's key to get rid of the boy who doesn't belong in the photo. And the other key aspect here, beyond just really hammering home the red and the green, because that's what makes the photo just jump off the page, is these colors. The other key thing is noticing her receive her lost dog and getting her excitement and joy just at the peak moment, and not getting it to where the dog's head is hitting the sky. Because if the dog's head is hitting the sky here, the shot's lost. The dog will blend into the sky. The dog is nicely framed in the background with this green hill. Here's another shot that's entirely driven by color. This is in Sri Lanka on the beach on this fishing village, and there's boats up and down this beach. You could spend all day photographing these guys loading and unloading their boats. I picked this boat in particular to spend my time at, again, because of the complementary colors. So here it's blue and orange, and the blue works so well with the blue sky, and the orange also works so well with the sand. And I'm working this scene for quite a while, for maybe 10 minutes or so. And so the dog comes by and lays down, and I just try to capture it as its most dynamic shape and form, with everybody separated and not noticing me. Reflections I work with a lot, primarily with mirrors, but also off of glass. In situations like this, reflections can be nice to get you closer to an object or a subject that may be shy. So this girl with the feather duster here in the red, I like her. And by shooting in this mirror and getting her in the mirror, she's pretty oblivious to the fact that I'm shooting her. And because of that, I also get the other things I like, which are the advertisements and these other characters in this shot. Here's an example of a shot where I was in this guy's workshop for a while, just because the atmosphere in this workshop was just amazing. The color, and it just had so much character. So I'm in there, I take a step out, and I notice the tiniest of slivers of glass, or I guess it's a mirror, stuck to the wall. And so just by noticing, by scanning the scene, and not just working the scene on this guy, I noticed this, and adjusting and framing the other guy allows me to add a lot more atmosphere into the shot. I become ignorable again. Luckily, like, there's some sort of malfunctioning wiring up here. I think that maybe something was sparking, making some noise, and this guy looks up and I get the shot. Symbols are very important for me in my work. They're sort of a universal language that people identify with and have a lot of emotions toward. So I use a lot of religious symbology. When I saw this guy coming in off the beach, this is a fisherman. I'm mainly not focused on his face. I'm not thinking about his face. I'm first noticing the cross, and that's what draws me in. And then I'm scanning the scene, and my supporting characters are the birds coming up. The one thing I notice about this photo that bothers me every time I look at it, and I'll talk about this later, is this shadow here. I wish this shadow were a full cross and not being overlapped by this other shadow. And it's oversights like that. I don't even know if I would call this an oversight. I don't even know if that shadow ever appeared full, but that's really what I'm looking for when I review my images at the end of the day. I'm looking for anything that I may not have picked up while I was out there. And I didn't realize that shadow was hitting his arm. Here's another example of a symbol being used in a very sort of mild way. And it's this flag in the window. By noticing it and by positioning myself so that I'm including it, it gives a photo a sense of place. So this photo, you'll know, is taken in Egypt. Here's another example of using a flag in a photo. Here is in Istanbul. This is in the bridge where boys jump off the bridge in the summer pretty often. And I scan the scene. I notice this gate with interesting framing potential here with these nice shapes. And then while I'm working with that, I'm scanning the scene some more, and I see the flag up above. So I position myself and get it so when the flag is blowing, I can get it. And it's rather abstract. It's not really obvious that it's the Turkish flag, but if you do know it's the Turkish flag, then it provides a little bit of an Easter egg. But it also just provides a lot of nice color. The next thing I look for is echo. There's a lot of definitions of what echo is. So maybe some things that I call echo, you may not think of as echo, but just to give you some examples, here's a very old shot. This is a very simple shot that just illustrating the echo of bald mannequin, just kind of a humorous shot. And I didn't really look for anything. I didn't really look to build off this shot creatively. I just took it and kept on walking. So here's an example of more abstract echo where you've got the eggs and you've got the boy wearing an eye patch that happens to look like an egg over easy. People ask me, like, how do you see these things? And you just have to look for them. And I'll explain that a little bit more, but you don't see them if you don't look for them, if you don't specifically look for them. But if you do look for them, you'll tend to find them more often than you would think. Here I'm in Petra, Jordan, and I noticed this on the wall, this graffiti where it's written in Arabic. It looks like somebody loves somebody. And then I notice this girl who's standing on the wall is wearing a skirt with hearts on it. Nice echo. I get very happy by discovering this, but it just seems too simple. It's the type of shot I would have taken years ago and just moved on. But I wait and I want something to happen. And it finally does when this guy gets into an argument with this girl, and the double date that they're on is going wrong. And you can see it with the expression on this guy's face. The love it's written on the wall. It's on her skirt, but it's not in the air. And that made the shot for me. Here's an example of finding echo after I've already found the subject, just finding echo on the fly, just finding it real quick. This is in Shanghai, China, and I see this girl wearing my favorite color, just so elegantly dressed, walking down the street. And as she's coming down the street, so I'm walking in front of her, trying to put as much distance as I can as I'm scanning and looking for interesting things. And I notice this bunny wearing the China shirt, the China sweatshirt. And so that's a nice little color match. But just as she's walking up, then I notice the echo, and I reframe the shot to get the echo. And the echo is her in her red dress with the red bag, and the girl up here, the symbol of the girl in the red, and the bunny with the blue, and the symbol with the blue up there. So shadows is the last of the elements that I'll talk about and what I look for. Shadows, it would seem like they'd be more common, but good shadows that have something that really benefits the picture, I find actually difficult to find and difficult to work with. Here's a shot in Oaxaca. And in this shot, the man is either leaving or coming to a market selling belts, but the shadow tells us a different story. It's the story of a cowboy holding a rope. Here is a use of shadows where I'm showing what's there by not even showing what's there. And that's with getting the camel's head here. So what's happening is the camel is being walked into the back of a truck. And I notice the shadow. And as soon as I notice the shadow, I'm anticipating. And as the camel's walking, the important thing is capturing the shadow so it's framed as well as I can only in this greenish blue square here. If the camel raises its head and the shadow collides with the concrete, either here or up here, the shot doesn't come together. It's the framing that's so important. And then the other thing is the shadow is also being framed by the gestures and the movement of the rope with these guys. So it's being framed in the background and in the foreground. So here's the last example of shadows. So there's shadow here of this bird, and the shadow is also an echo, so it's echoing this bird, and it's also nicely framed here. This shot definitely didn't start off like this. So to give you an idea of how messy this shot started off, it started off with me just working the wrong angle. I noticed birds flying by and having their shadows cast on this wall. And this is such a low probability shot with birds flying by that I can't even see, trying to catch their shadow here. And beyond that, like, is it that great of a shot? I don't think so. But I still wasted like 15 minutes trying to capture birds over here before I finally threw in the towel. These are all horrible. And what it looked like when I turned around was this. And so this was what I noticed was the shadow of the bird. And you can see here what I'm saying when I talk about the shadow needs to be defined. So this shadow, well, I know it's a bird because I'm there. The viewer probably won't know this is a bird. It's not really bird shape. And I've got all these birds up here and this bird up here, and it's just a mess. But at this point, I'm not even thinking, I haven't realized that there's echo possibilities. I'm just thinking cool bird shadow, right? And so I get the idea of taking this horrible shot where I get the actual bird and then I get this shadow. That doesn't work out well. And then this is almost dialed in. So I waited until the right birds left. I moved a little closer. So the important thing to really punctuate the echo is only having one bird up here. If there's two birds and just one shadow, that's not really punctuating the echo. So having the birds leave and getting in closer, but still the issue, what I'm not satisfied with is this bird, its posture is not properly echoing this bird. So I'm willing to wait for however long it takes. It doesn't take that long. Let me just go back to the final photo. Where is it? And the other nice thing is this guy's entering the frame rather than leaving the frame once it finally happens. So you can see shadow, echo, framing, supporting characters, a lot of things coming together here. So now I'll just walk through some shots to show you what it looks like to sort of make myself ignorable and find and pick up a lot of different elements while I'm scanning the scene. Here's a little snack shop in Cairo. This is very typical while you're walking down the road. And a lot of times I like to stop and just get a water or something just to make some small talk and make myself be like a friendly guy with the camera rather than just some stranger who's walking down the street. So that's what I do here. And as you can see, typical of Cairo, when I'm walking down the street, everybody's looking. These kids are looking. This guy's doing a double take. This guy that's getting out of his car is looking. And this guy is nicely framed in this window and he's looking way up there. But what I've noticed from, I'm just thinking I'm getting a water. I'm not even thinking I'm building a scene at this point. But right here, I've noticed this car. It's beautiful, the color, and it's got a lot of character. So I work around to the other side, and I'm primarily doing this to get the kids to not pay attention to me. I want my attention to be on this car. And I work around a little bit and I get some more problems, which is more kids really smiling, interested in me. And I make my way over to the passenger side. This kid's extra smiling and showing off now, but as you've noticed, I've picked up something cool, which is this reflection here. And it's not only a reflection of just any building, it's a reflection of a nice symbolic building, a building that brings more atmosphere and story to the picture. And that's this church, which is being reflected off this window. And one thing that's important with dealing with reflections, especially if you shoot with autofocus, if you shoot with autofocus, you're going to miss a reflection like this. And you miss reflections with your eyes a lot of the time, just because we're not really used to focusing on them. So with autofocus, your camera is going to probably focus on this door, and the reflection is going to be a little bit blurry. To properly get this reflection and focus, let's just say the church is 30 feet behind me and I'm 3 feet in front of the door. I actually need to focus the distance between myself, the glass, and the church which would be 33 feet. So by using zone focusing, it makes something like this a lot easier, because I don't even have to think about it. It's automatically in focus. So here, this is a nice element that's been introduced. It's not quite composed the way I would like. Plus this boy is still really happy. And then the other problem that I've got is this car that I haven't really noticed, but it's pretty ugly. So I continue to scan the scene and work it. And then the moment happens where the boys become completely oblivious to my presence. They're in their own moments. And I do the best I can to frame each one in a window, as well as best show the church to give the atmosphere of the shot. Here's a pretty typical scene in Cairo, passing by these guys. Notice the scene it seems really tight, all these guys, and it's really kind of messy. The only thing that's attracting me to the scene is this guy sitting here reading the newspaper. I'm really attracted to guys reading the newspaper. I hate guys on their cell phone. So the newspaper is kind of like an old-fashioned thing that I just think is really cool to capture in photos. So I'm not even expecting that great of a photo to come out of this. I don't know what's going to happen. And out of all the scenes that I worked, that I'm showing you, this is probably the one that happened the quickest. So some of these take 5 or 10 minutes to build. This was literally probably a 20-second build from just walking from this point to where I take the photo. So I take a couple steps, and I'm timing my approach with the guy who's delivering tea to this guy. So that's kind of providing a distraction. And here I'm still just shooting while standing. And here I notice my framing opportunity, which is this guy's head in the tire. And I take one step and I crouch down and go for the shot. And this is when I've noticed the symbol, dialed in the framing here. And the other nice thing is this guy's now getting his tea and looking up at the guy bringing in the tea. And so the magic was sort of him having the light reflect off his sunglass or off his eyeglasses and just really bringing him to life. And the picture comes together because of that. And shortly after I crouched down and take this picture, and right after that, they're like, yeah, get out of here. But so here's in Giza, right next to the pyramids. This is an area that I like to photograph because it's cool to see the pyramids behind the neighborhood. A lot of people don't know that the pyramids are right up against the neighborhood. But typical of photographing in Egypt, as soon as you take one photo, the kids notice, they come over, this kid's already playing and showing off, and the game ends right then and there. And they're all surrounding me here, so I'm trying to ignore them. I've noticed this tree here, which I like the shape of this tree. It sort of mirrors and echoes the pyramid. And I try a while, I experiment with this composition. It goes nowhere. As most experiments, most go nowhere and don't actually turn out to be a shot. But I'm experimenting here for a while, and I take a step back. And here's where I make the key observation as I'm scanning the scene. I notice the echo of the symbol of the warning sign here with the pyramid. And this composition still feels pretty loose, pretty undefined to me. So I work my way around, and now it's kind of coming together. What I really like here, what I've noticed here, is the red and the green, the complementary colors, as well as getting the echo closer to the pyramid. But there's one thing that I don't like about this shot, is it's not telling the story that I want to tell with the shot. Similar to the shot in Istanbul, where I wanted the moment of the mothers with their daughters, with this shot, I wanted the moment with the son and his father. And so I wait until the woman leaves. And now I get a better shot with them framed both in the foreground and in the background, as well as keep the echo. Here's the photo from the title page, but the scene from the title page, but here you see it looks a lot different. This guy invited me into this shop, and you can't say no to an invitation like that with a shop that's just so full of character. So I walk in and he's cutting these metal things. As you can see, you know, he's not normally cutting these metal things with this big smile on his face. So this is shortly after I've walked in, and my presence is definitely felt. But here I've noticed the mirror, and I adjust. And, you know, first I'm thinking about a composition like this, and it still doesn't feel that great. It just feels too obvious. And I scan the scene, and then I notice more. I notice the cat here on the chair, but there's some problems here. And it's that problem of context. I know this is a cat, but to a viewer, it kind of just looks like, you know, a white lump, unless you really look at it and see that it's a cat. It's not as defined as it could be. So I wait and recompose. And here it shows its profile, and it's more obvious that it's a cat. And I also like that now I'm seeing people are walking up and down the street outside, which adds some more elements to the story. Not really excited about this guy walking down the street, though. He's not the character I'm looking for. This moment happens, which I like. I like the kid running. I like that he's running. But the problem now is that I've lost my profile of my cat. So I wait, and then the moment happens. The cat does what it needs to do. I get these guys as good as I can get them, and I get this boy running by. Here's the last shot that I'll talk about. This is October 2020. This is during the peak of COVID lockdowns. I had been in Cairo several times prior to this, and prior to actually coming here, I had spent at least a week in Giza, going every day to the pyramid complex. Normally the pyramid complex is very busy, but because of the COVID lockdowns, nobody was there. And from afar, I noticed all these white uniformed men, and I knew this was an extremely rare scene, a rare opportunity. So I start running as fast as I can with my camera to get into the Sphinx complex here. And here I'm taking this photo right as I'm passing this Egyptian soldier. And there's some of them here, and there's more of these guys. I know that these guys are sailors, and but I don't know where they're from. I just know they're from a different country at this point. More of them come in, and it's a really messy scene. I try to get this shot. I don't even know what I'm doing. I go up top, I get this shot. And this scene, I know this scene has a life of maybe 5 or 10 minutes tops before it disappears. And I know that this is a rare moment. And because of that, I'm just running around working the scene madly with complete tunnel vision. What's wrong with these photos, besides just them being horrible, is that I'm not scanning for any key elements. I'm missing elements that are staring at me in the face, and I'm blowing it. I'm completely hypnotized by this scene. it's too big for me. Like, it caught me off guard. And it's this moment that they start to leave. And I realize it. I realize that I don't realize my shots are as bad as they were, but I knew that I didn't have anything really. And it's about this moment that I realize this, and I pull myself out of it and actually take a moment, like maybe a minute, to think. And I realize I'm not defining the context. The symbol I'm completely taking for granted. And I also have this flashback to a podcast that I really enjoyed listening to that talked about uniforms and the reason why people wear uniforms, the reason for the uniform for the Navy, the Marines, the reason why even like the Yankees have, baseball teams have uniforms, is when you become a Marine or a sailor, you join the Navy, you're becoming something greater than yourself. You're giving up your individuality and you're becoming a part of something bigger. And so that's why they all get their hair cut the same. And I was missing that element. And that lesson that I learned from the podcast popped into my head. And then I noticed the symbol that I was just oblivious of and taking for granted right as they're leaving here. And so I take my final shot at getting a decent photo when the last group is taking their final selfie. I see the moment. I see what I need to do. I need to hammer home the symbol, which is the anchor here. And not only that, but I need to remove the individuality and make it about the symbol. By just doing a simple thing of squatting down a little bit and getting the symbol framed in his arm and with a shadow, and more importantly, or at least equally important, getting his face blocked out and removing the fact that we don't need to know who this guy is. All we need to know, and what's important to convey, is this guy in the Navy at the Pyramid Complex. And if you happen to speak French, you can read his hat and then see that they're from France. But anyway, because I snapped out of it, remembered those lessons, and remembered to look for the key elements, I was able to get this photo. And because of this photo, the Cairo project that I've been working on and that I'm still working on, this is what basically launched the Cairo project. And so many things have happened because of this photo. So hopefully these stories of how these photos came together have given you some creative insights about how to use these different elements, and just the idea of looking for them while you're actually working the scene, to scan the scene and juggle them in. Just keep in mind, it's a very, very low percentage process. It's not an easy thing to do, and most things don't turn out to anything. That's it. Really appreciate you tuning in to the talk. We'll do some Q&A here, I guess. If you'd like to see more of my work, you can see it at jonathanjasberg.com. I'm C1A Flyer on Instagram, and I'll turn over the share screen.
Wonderful, wonderful. I mean, if you want to leave that up for people so that they can.
Oh, okay.
That's fine. Nobody came to see my face. That was really awesome. I found myself really, looking at the images in a different way and kind of following along with you, like that second to last image that you showed with the cat and everything, and talking about echo and everything like that. I mean, maybe it was my ADHD brain and I missed you mentioning about it, but I even picked up on like the echo of, if you kind of look at the wall, you sort of have almost like, it looks like a cat figure on the wall as well, which was kind of cool. And so, you got through to me, which is no small feat. I have a really tiny brain. So great job there. We'll start off the Q&A, and just to anybody who's watching, if you have any questions that you want to get them in now before it's too late, because otherwise that's it. Jonathan's got to go to bed.
Yeah, so 1 a.m. here, and
that's it. The man has work to do tomorrow. So just kind of talking about, street photography as a whole. I think something that we don't really address enough is from your perspective, and obviously this changes from person to person. But what do you find to be kind of the biggest difficulties in being a street photographer, and what is ultimately the reward in that? You know, what do you find to be that kind of like, uh, I won't say
Yeah.
payment, but you know, in kind of layman terms, that payment, that gratification to you to continue
Right.
what you're doing.
Yeah, I think street photographers, especially early on, I know I had issues with this, is early on you get so attached to trying to produce an image, and that pressure is definitely amplified by things like Instagram, you know, having that pressure to upload and to produce images. Street photography is such a low percentage game, right? And um, being happy with going out there and just really loving the process, loving just being out there taking photos and knowing you're going to come home day after day, sometimes week after week, sometimes even months go by, and it's just crap on the SD card that you're bringing home and loading into your computer. You know, it's very difficult to get good shots, and so I think that's one of the biggest problems, is only attached to getting the good shots and not really loving just the whole process, and getting out there and taking photos and interacting and just the whole joy of it all.
Great. Now, Daniel wanted to know, do you find wide angle is better than a standard lens? Do you spend a lot of time cropping the images, or images are just straight from camera?
Yeah, so I used to shoot with a zoom. Maybe I used to do a lot of different types of photography too, I should add that. But I used to shoot with a few different lenses, and the issue is so there's a reason why so many different really well-known photographers recommend one lens, like picking one lens. They recommend things like picking a prime lens too. And I think you can do a lot of creative work with any lens that you pick up. But specifically a prime lens and the transition to just using one lens and not having any options, to me, I noticed the way that I could produce was accelerated so much, because you're no longer considering, do I need to, you know, should I zoom? Should I change lenses in the field? Things like that, right? All you're doing is getting to know the lens that you use. So whether or not it's 28, 35, 50, you know, whatever, you want to get to where, you know, basically when you pull the camera up to your eye, or when you're holding it, however you take shots, what's going to be about what's going to be in your frame. It's very important. So yeah, my advice is just pick a prime and stick with it.
Great. And then in terms of cropping, are most images just straight out of
Oh,
camera, or is there cropping involved?
yeah. So with the Q2, which is what I shoot with, so it's a 28 millimeter, but I usually shoot with the 35 millimeter frame lines showing. And so it's kind of a feature of the camera. And I usually try to get the composition between 28 millimeters and 35 millimeters, somewhere between the two. So some of the shots, like the shot with the camel shadow on the wall, that's straight out of the camera. That's not even angled or cropped at all. Some of them are cropped a little, but I like to have a consistent look of that wide angle. And I also should mention that I do shoot with a 35 millimeter lens on a film camera, on an M6. So I try to have my standard be between 28 to 35, just so it has a consistent look.
Awesome. Now, obviously, there's no right answer here, but but you know, there's two camps, right? There's color, and then there's black and white.
Yeah.
And like I said, there's no right answer, but for you, what makes you, you know, committed to color versus black and white? You know, why have you chosen to produce most of your images in color versus going the black and white route?
Yeah. So I love a lot of black and white photographers. one of my first inspirations was Elliot Erwitt and all his black and white work. I really enjoy black and white work, but for me as a photographer, I just feel the color. And my first street photo, which is actually the last photo that came up on the splash screen that I took that back in the early 2000s. That was in color, and the photo relied on color, and all my photos really rely on color. So it's just always been an integral process or part of the process in how I see. Yeah, so there's never really been a choice. I've never really thought. I think I did accidentally buy a roll of black and white when I was in Japan once and ran it through my camera, but I can't take a decent black and white photo. I don't know how to do it. So
you're too hard on yourself. You're too hard on yourself. Elizabeth wanted to know how many years have you been shooting, and what drew you to your style of photography?
So I think I bought my first camera on B&H of all places back in the early 2000s, maybe 2003. And my style evolved over time. It was simpler at first, and I was actually into different types of photography. So like I was really inspired by guys like Gregory Crutzen, David LaChapelle, guys that had really big production shots, you know, and I liked doing off-camera lighting, outdoors and stuff. And I also did, you know, like typical travel photography. But over time, my style just kind of developed as I tried to sort of hone the skill of building scenes and trying to see things thematically in the way that I do. So it's just a process that's taken years and years and sort of developed. But
wonderful. Well, I want to say thanks again for being here. I'm going to ask you one last question and then we'll wrap it up. Derek and I have been slacking on this. This is the B&H event space. It's the most important question we ask everybody in a while, but we're taking tally, we're taking count. We're going to go back at the end of the year. I'm going to have Derek watch all the videos and let us know who won. But are you team lens cap or team no lens cap?
Oh, no lens cap.
No lens cap. All right, notch it down. Derek, add one to the no lens cap list. Everybody, definitely go check out Jonathan's work on Instagram and check out his website. I want to say, Jonathan, thanks for staying up super late. I know it's really early in the morning over there for you. So thanks for staying up with us. We really appreciate it. For everybody else who tuned in, thanks for joining us. I hope you picked something up. I know I definitely did. And if you want to rewatch this, which I definitely recommend and suggest, because I will, check us out, vimeo.com/BH Event Space, or give us a follow on Facebook, BH Event Space, same on Instagram. Jonathan, thanks again. Any last words?
No, just, yeah, thanks everybody for checking out. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, this has been another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. We'll catch you next time.